connect. I think it's important that your viewers understand that they should be valuing their own time as well. And then when you do reach out, you mentioned it earlier there, Brian. Send a positive message. Give someone a compliment. I love when people pump up my ego. Someone says, "Hey, saw your video. It's fantastic." Frick, I'll give you 50 minutes of my time just because you said you like my content.
Hello and welcome to Beyond Networking, the show where we help you build a sustainable career in an unpredictable world. We believe if you learn to weave a network of people who trust you, who feel heard, understood, and valued in your presence, there will always be someone willing to hire you, buy from you, or work with you. On this show, we feature intimate conversations with legends and leaders of industries about the relationships, connections, and chance encounters that form the foundation of success. Remember to subscribe for world-class insights on how to build a life and career that you are proud of. And join our community at beyondnetworkingpodcast.com. All right, that's it for me. Now it's time to go beyond networking with this week's guest,
Dominic Vogel. All right, Dominic, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Brian, I am super stoked for this convo. Let's get at it.
Yes, let's get at it like we haven't been chatting for the last 10 minutes. So I know I ruined the illusion right away. But to be honest, I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and especially because after 3 seasons of running this show, I feel like I got almost too comfortable with getting polished with the way that I conduct interviews, and I feel like I've gotten away a little bit from the early days of this podcast when I was really learning about people in the course of the conversation as opposed to really coming in prepared, knowing how the conversation was going to go. And so I mentioned before, you're going to be a bit of a guinea pig in a few different times today. I did less quote-unquote prep work today than I have been over the last season or two, because I actually want to learn about your story here in real time and ask the questions that a person would ask if they were discovering that, and not just the ones that fit the narrative of the podcast. So I hope that's cool with you.
Absolutely. I mean, I did zero prep too, Brian, for being honest. So it's all
well. There we go. There we go. We are both completely unprepared.
It says epic written all over it.
I think the title of this episode is going to be "Fake It Till You Make It." So let's start with this. I am going to start with the same question I always do, only because I still think it's the best place to start, which is, imagine you were at a cocktail party or these days a virtual networking event, and someone comes to you cold, has never met you before, and they just say, "Hey, what do you do?" What's your answer these days?
Good question. My short little elevator pitch in terms of what I do: cyber risk leadership for small and mid-sized businesses.
Wow, that wasn't an elevator pitch. That was I don't know what that was. That was a "you're walking past me" pitch, and I want to get him. I'm going to get him on the sidewalk,
holding the door open, or as the elevator door is closing.
What I love about that is I preach this all the time lately when people come to me for help with their elevator pitch, and I'm like, who has time for an elevator pitch anymore? Nobody's got 30 seconds. What are you kidding? So I love that. So repeat that, and then let's dive into it. So what was it again?
Yeah, so cyber risk leadership for small and mid-sized businesses.
That is, I love that. Okay, cyber risk leadership for small and mid-sized businesses. That does so many things in one tight sentence. So what is cyber risk leadership?
So the premise of it is that cyber risk is a risk that's facing all organizations. 10 years ago, it was just the big companies that had to worry about cyber risk, but because of the digital economy, and even now during COVID, with even more organizations having to become increasingly more virtualized, cyber risk and digital risk is a risk that faces all organizations of all shapes and sizes. And the problem, though, is that with most small and mid-sized organizations, there's no one really within those companies that knows how to deal with cyber risk. And I'm not just talking about the technical weeds, but even understanding how technology and business meet and the intersection of risk there. The large organizations, they all have highly paid people who take care of that. A small and mid-sized organization, they have no way of dealing with that. And that often falls onto the CEO, COO, the business owner. and they're too busy trying to make their organization succeed. That's where we come in, and we take that portfolio off their desk and serve them as their trusted advisor, and at least run with that so they don't have to be bogged down by that.
Yeah, okay. So I guess my first question would be, when you say small and mid-sized, I feel like a lot of folks, when they hear small business, they think, oh, you mean, the corner shop with two
Yes.
people or three people. But what to you in the business world, small and mid-sized means a very different thing. So what is the scope of that?
Absolutely. And you ask 10 people what they think a small mid-sized business means, you get 10 different answers. Our interpretation of that is organizations as small as, generally speaking, about a dozen employees, all the way up to about 1,000 employees. So with our client base, our smallest client, I believe, has just under 10 employees. Our largest has just under 1,000. So it's pretty much the full gamut there. The average size of a SMB for us is around 75 employees. Again, they come in all different sectors. Many of them could be professional service firms, like law firms, small accounting firms. Others could be smaller retail shops, manufacturing firms, tech firms. It's what's interesting about cyber risk is that every organization now uses computers, they use the internet, they deal with data. Therefore, they have cyber risk and they have to deal with it.
So are there different sorts of risks for a really small local business with 10 or 12 employees versus 1,000, or is it because the internet is the internet, it's kind of the same risk? What is it different, and what are these risks that we're worried about right now?
Yeah, absolutely, and to me, I think it really comes down to the data. The data which an organization uses, the data that an organization collects. If they're collecting, even an example of an organization which maybe they just sell some little widget, they don't do anything on the internet. If they do payroll, I'm hoping they do, they pay their employees, they'll have their social security number, they'll have their address, they'll have all their personal information. If they don't adequately protect that information, if a cyber criminal comes in and breaks into that small and mid-sized business, takes that data, now that company can be sued, they can be held liable, they have to pay credit monitoring services to those that were affected. And that's just a really small scale example, but cyber crime as a whole is consistently rated by the World Economic Forum as being one of the top risks facing organizations of all sizes around the world.
Oh, I believe it, because I was one of the many people that was directly impacted by the Equifax breach, and it was a nightmare for 2 years. And it was a nightmare that kept going because I didn't even realize it, because initially I had to go through the entire process of freezing everything and shutting things down and this and that, and then I kind of forgot about it. But what had happened, this was so nuts. So then, I don't know, a year, 2 years later, we were buying a house, and I had totally forgotten that happened. And we went to go make an offer after months of searching dozens of houses. This was it. And we wanted to make a quick offer, and I couldn't make an offer because my credit was frozen. And I had forgotten about the credit freeze. And then that set off weeks of a nightmare, because Equifax wanted some number that they sent me, which of course they never sent me because it crashed while we were all trying to go through that. The website never sent that. And then they said I had to mail in something to a post office box. And oh my God. So my question is, I know how easily this can affect on an individual level, on a personal level, but Equifax got it wrong.
Yes.
So how are you getting it right?
Well, really, to me, it comes down to doing the basics and doing them well. And with large organizations, like Equifax, one of the main problems there was just poor leadership. They focused on functionality, they focused on getting services out. Security did not get the due diligence and the time and airtime that it deserved there. Even when you watch the former CEO, how he handled that in the aftermath of the data breach, rather than taking responsibility like any good leader, he blamed some poor person in IT. That was, and I use that as a case study of how not to respond in the aftermath of a data breach. Equifax was a massive company; they're going to survive. But what a lot of small and mid-sized businesses don't understand is that they're the ones who have the most to lose. I'll often ask people, is it a large company that has the most to lose in the aftermath of a data breach, or a small business? And everyone always says, well, it's a large company. They have more money at stake. It's a paradox. It's actually it's an existential threat for small and mid-sized businesses. If you experience a data breach, and especially in environments like the U.S., where it's like litigation up the wazoo, you're done. And that's what a lot of people don't know, because you don't see those stories on the news. It's the big companies that experience the massive data breaches. Those are the ones that make the news. The smaller companies that experience sort of those quote unquote smaller data breaches, you never hear about them because they go out of business. The prime example that I like giving for that one is, do you remember a few years back? I'm going to say it was probably about 6 or 7 years, maybe longer, when Target, the retail store, got breached. There was a massive data breach there. What happened there was that their HVAC vendor, which was a small company, they're the ones that got compromised, and through that access, Target's internal network got compromised. Target survived. Target still is a retail organization. That HVAC vendor, which no one knows the name of, it's gone. It no longer exists. Poof, it disappeared. Again, because they didn't focus on at least doing some basics when it came to cybersecurity. So I use that as a prime example of how it truly is an existential threat.
That's a great example, and I feel like that's also it really underscores the fact that small businesses and even medium-sized businesses, like you're describing, 1,000 employees, which on the grand scale are still pretty small.
Yeah.
That those businesses really survive. One, they work on incredibly small cash flow margins,
Yes.
by and large, and we all over the last few months discovered that restaurants mostly don't have 2 weeks of cash in the bank, right?
Yeah.
And that the amount of mom and pop restaurants have been in business for 20, 30 years, went out of business in a week and a half because there just wasn't enough money to weather the storm, no matter how successful they had been, because that's just not the operating model. And and that these big businesses, they have the cash flow, but they have access, at least in the U.S., to an unbelievable amount of additional cash, bailout, no interest loans. I mean, stuff.
There's a big war chest.
Yeah, there really is. And I mean, that I think over the last few months, it was really underscored that problem for, folks like me, sole proprietors, where the U.S. had to rewrite the laws overnight to help people like me survive, which they never would have done if it had only been a couple of us. But it was the entire country's small businesses and sole proprietors that, how they always say small business is the backbone of the economy, and people are like, nah, that's just something you say to make yourself feel better. It's like, no, it turns out if we had collapsed, the whole country would have collapsed. And so, but what they had to go through to even help us a little bit was amazing. And then for me, it also underscores the fact that small businesses really thrive on trust, right? The trust of their customers, their clients, and even their own employees. And that a large business, for some reason, when they get to a certain level, they seem to be able to get away with breaching trust without losing. Like Amazon's breached my trust many times. So has Facebook. I'm still ordering from Amazon. I'm still using Facebook because there's just nowhere else to go once you get to that level.
That's so true. And, it's interesting that you mentioned that concept of trust. And one of the fields which I truly believe is going to be emerging over the next few years into the next decade is this concept, what I refer to as digital trust, in which there's that concept. And I think it's, like you're pointing out there, I think it's much more so important with, from a consumer perspective, that relationship with smaller and mid-sized organizations, but even that concept of trust between businesses. If big company A cannot trust small company C with how they're protecting their data or in terms of how they're interacting, they're going to go somewhere else, and then that smaller company will now lose out on a big contract or a big customer there. So I mean, from that business to business model, there's like I said, I'm really seeing that concept of digital trust really emerging, in which that was never really thought of before. But if you can't trust that company with your data and from a security perspective, the massive amounts of money are at stake now.
Yeah, and I feel like the tide has really shifted over the last 10 years or so from attention being the big asset, right? Everybody was just trying to get attention. Now attention's easy. You can buy attention, right? You can just pay money for ads and shove your message in front of everybody on the planet. But earning trust is the whole game, and connecting with those people, and a huge part of connection is trust. So I'd like to back up into kind of how you ended up in this field. Was this, when you're 5 years old, are you like, I'm going to do cybersecurity? Like
Not quite.
how do you end up like walking backwards and tripping into a field like this, or how intentional? Talk me through that.
Yeah, I mean, my origin story goes back to my late high school days. So my dad, who's since retired, was a high school teacher, and he taught physics and computer science. And I always knew at an early age I wanted to do something with computers. I was always really interested in that. I'm a product of the early '90s, or I grew up in the '90s, I should say. And so when I got to wanted to figure out what I wanted to do in life, what was one of my passions, my dad just brought home he would always get this huge stack of IT computer magazines. He'd say, what, there's probably something in this massive stack. I'm not kidding. It was probably a stack of like 200. He said, I get these in my mailbox all the time. I've been stacking them on my desk at work. He said, I've been looking for somewhere to dump them. I'm going to dump them in your room. So he put that massive stack in there. And he said, there's got to be something in there. So this is late in my grade 12 year, and I was going through it, and nothing was sticking. And then this magazine appeared out of nowhere, and I looked at it, and it said information security. And I thought, what the hell is information security? And I opened it up, and I still do have that magazine somewhere in my home office here. I need to dig it out, but I was just enthralled by it.
I will say this, the early 90s. So that I'm an 80s baby, but I grew up, like, my memory of childhood is the early 90s, right?
Nice. Yeah,
and
you and
my
I are
father,
the same,
exactly. And my father is a computer scientist, and so is my mom. My mom's a systems engineer, a programmer. My dad's a theoretical computer scientist. So I grew up just around computers, and I knew how to type without looking before any of my friends even owned a computer. You know what I mean? Like, you think about how much has changed just in computing and just normal personal computing since we were kids. I mean, man, it just seems like a different lifetime. That I remember I learned how to type on Mario Teaches Typing on a Macintosh. Mario Teaches Typing. And so at what point then you were starting to think about this? Now, Did you get to a point in school or high school, or at some point when you got to do a computer class? Where did that go?
Yeah, so I mean, that magazine really spurred additional interest in me, and I was at that point that I was going to go to university. I was going to study computer science, and that was something which I knew. I would say probably in my grade 10 or 11 year. But I realized that cybersecurity was something which really interested me, and I really wanted to focus on. And when I got to university and started studying in computer science, I went through my 4-year degree, and the word cybersecurity was mentioned once, and that was by me. I asked a question about it. Right? So it was a lot of what I learned about cybersecurity in the early days was stuff that was self-taught. I've always been an avid reader, so I just absorbed as much stuff as I possibly could. And when I graduated, I held out. I wanted something related to cybersecurity, and I'm a bit of a rarity in which most cybersecurity professionals come up through IT or through a non-cybersecurity role. I'm one of the few who have been, I would say, very lucky and humbled to have spent my entire 15-year career only doing cybersecurity. So it's I was very lucky, like I said, after graduating, to be able to land a role in as a cybersecurity administrator.
Wow, amazing. Okay, so when you say land a role, now you went through college. You basically never heard the term cybersecurity. Somehow you were committed to staying on that route in spite of the fact that you'd spent 4 years, I almost said wasted 4 years, that you spent 4 years not learning about the thing you wanted to do. how this is where I think all these stories that I bring people on to tell always end up tying into connection and networking and things like that. I mean, how did you end up finding a job in that if you hadn't even barely learned about it or you weren't already engrossed in that field?
Well, it's somewhat funny in which, when, like I said, I held out. I really felt so strongly about the field, and that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to work my way into it. I felt I wanted to get that to learn right away. And someone took a chance on me, and he said to me in the interview, my first manager, he said, your passion is through the roof. He said, I've never met someone who's incredibly passionate about this field. He said, your energy is amazing. He said, we've interviewed people who are more senior than you, like would be better in the role than you. He said, none of them are going to be able to bring the type of passion and energy that you've shown in this interview. He said, I'm going to pay you peanuts, but he said, I think you're going to have a really great first gig here. And I said, that's awesome. I'll take it. When do I start? And that was something which, all these years later, I still remember, and why, for me personally, when someone tells me that they're interested in the industry, I will move heaven and earth to try and get someone a job in cybersecurity, because if my first manager had not taken a chance on me, who knows? I may have ended up being a lawyer or something else that the world doesn't need more of. But
why is it lawyers are always the ones that we slam down in our examples? I feel like attorney or accountant, they're always my two examples of like.
It's either that or used car salesperson.
Or used car for bad sales. Yeah. I'm sorry to all my really exciting accountant friends, of which I think I have none. Not that I have no exciting friends, just none that are accountants. I don't think it's getting better as I'm talking, but nonetheless, accountants are like writing off my podcast as we speak. So you ended up, somebody took a chance on you. I love that, because I feel like I always assume that everybody had that moment where there was a teacher or a coach or a first manager or boss that took a chance on them, and that's how they learned to, to get into their career, to build self-confidence, that what they're doing was on the right track. And it's also how people learn to then pass that along when they get into that same position. But based on the amount of self-help books and questions that people ask all the time on the internet, I worry that it's actually pretty rare to have that moment that it's really, I feel like everybody's had it because those are the people I talk to, right? That it's like a confirmation bias. What would you say to someone then that's trying to get into maybe not even cybersecurity, just any field really, especially a young person today? My little sister, we have a big age gap, and she graduated college in May. She was one of this generation that graduated virtually, watching a virtual commencement and ceremony after 4 years of hard work, and just had to sit there on her laptop by herself and graduate. She's entering a world that, for maybe the better part of the next 2 years is going to be very unpredictable.
Yeah.
What kind of advice do you have then for somebody in that position, a young person that's really trying to get their start in their field?
That's such a great question, Brian. And I'm very humbled to be in a position now where even through platforms like LinkedIn, I get a lot of students reaching out saying, what would you suggest? What should I focus on? And a lot of them will say, are there textbooks I should buy? There's things I should invest in, a certification or what have you. And the number one answer I always give is invest in relationships. One thing I wish someone had told me early on, I only started really investing in relationships probably when I started as an entrepreneur, so about 5 years ago. But nothing gives you that type of return on investment than investing in relationships. It is truly, truly remarkable. And having virtual platforms like LinkedIn to be able to connect with people all around the world has been truly amazing. And what it's done for me personally and professionally is incredible. I don't even have the premium version of LinkedIn. It's just investing my time.
I got to tell you, I've never paid for LinkedIn, any version of it ever. I've had the free version, and I have to tell you, I love that you brought up virtual platforms, because for the last couple of months, there's been so much panic around how am I going to network? How am I going to build relationships and build connection in a virtual world? So much so that I'm now making a living literally shifting from having given keynotes and stuff in the real world to I'm giving interactive workshops on how to build connection in the virtual world. I hate to tell you this. They're exactly the same. Everything I'm talking about is exactly the same as I was talking about in person. I mean, there's literally no different advice, but people are hung up on this idea that if it's virtual, somehow you can't do it. It's like, no, the beauty of virtual is that it doesn't just have to be the person standing in the room that you're in. It's anyone, everywhere, at all times. It's amazing, the opportunities now.
That's so true, Brian. I think there's been this long-held fallacy that you need to meet someone in person in order to develop a relationship. Just on LinkedIn, the connections I've made, the friendships I've built have been absolutely incredible. In fact, one of my closest friends, a dear friend of mine, just random LinkedIn connection. He's in the cybersecurity realm as well. He's based in Toronto, Canada, and I'm here in Vancouver. I've only ever met him once in person, but he and I have this incredible friendship. Now we chat once a week, every Friday morning. And he and I are just we confide so much in each other, and it's truly remarkable. And I think it to me shatters the myth that to develop a meaningful relationship you need to meet someone to be in person. To me, that's not true.
Man, I agree with that so much. I don't even have the words for it. I have so many meaningful relationships with people I've never met in person in my life. Many of the most fulfilling ones. And then even when I think about some, like my best friends in the world that I moved out of state a long time. I mean, 15 years ago, I moved away from home, from my hometown, and most of them stayed there. And one of my best friends in the world, I'm lucky if I see him once a year. And now it could be who knows how long before I see him again. But we talk 3 hours a week, 4 hours a week sometimes still. We get on video calls. We get on regular calls if we're not into video at that moment. And our relationship hasn't changed. If anything, it's gotten deeper because it's forced us to intentionally be in touch, as opposed to when you see people in the real world all the time, it's easy to just think. It's easy to think that because you're in the room with them, you're somehow building on your relationship. That doesn't mean you're building on your relationship just because you're physically sharing the same space.
And another fallacy, in terms of relationship there, in which people think, well, I have to spend a lot of time with someone in order to develop a meaningful relationship with someone. One of my dearest and best friends is someone who I'm lucky that I get to chat with maybe once or twice a quarter. But when we talk, we just pick up like when we last chatted, right? It's incredibly meaningful dialogue and conversation, and those are the hallmarks of amazing friendships, where you can go weeks and months without talking with someone, and when you meet them again, you just hit the ground running, it's truly amazing. And even in the case of just you and I, you and I had such an awesome first convo, and then as soon as we just had a second convo, it's like we just picked up the ball from where we last left off. Again, it's not the physical proximity which makes friendships. To me, it comes from within. If you're using a virtual platform, you can still have an amazing friendship. To me, friendships start from within you, not physical proximity.
And this is such a good case study too. So let me talk the listener right now through how you and I ended up having this conversation we're having right now, because you sent me a cold invite, a cold connection on LinkedIn. I had never heard of you. I didn't know you through mutual friends, but you had discovered me because you were following Heather Monahan. I've traced it back.
That's exactly right.
So you were following Heather Monahan, who is amazing and wonderful and lovely. And she came on my podcast, did me a great honor. And how I ended up connected with her is a whole story that even informs this one, but for maybe a different time. And so you were following her. She was on my podcast. She promoted her episode on my podcast. You saw me. You listened. You liked something about the way I was having that conversation. So you connected with me. Now, there was nothing to it. I think you literally said, really enjoy your work. Just would like to learn more about you, find more about your work. That was it. That was good enough for me. I was like, hey, like my work? Good enough for me. It's like that flattery is always a good place to start. You know what I mean? And so then we got connected, which means now on LinkedIn, LinkedIn actually seems to prioritize your latest, newest connections. It keeps showing you like,
Yes.
your new connection just posted this. It does that for a little bit. So I kept seeing your name pop up in my notifications, and I would check it out because what else am I doing? And if I'm on LinkedIn, I may as well see something new. And then you did a guest spot on Sarah Elkin's podcast,
That's right. Yeah.
which was also random how you ended up on there because you didn't know her at all either.
That's right.
And I just want to underscore the amount of seeming randomness in all of this. So you were on her podcast. She posted a little clip. I listened to that clip. You were speaking very openly about family history of mental illness, which so do I, and my wife's a therapist, and so like there's I'm involved in that world, and I really felt connected with you, and so I ended up reaching out to you to have a chat. We jumped on a Zoom call. For no real purpose in particular other than getting to know each other. You were asking about how you could help me. I was asking how I could help you. And we ended up deciding you would be great for this podcast. And so within the span of just like 2 months of a cold connection, we've got the foundation of relationship. And honestly, like I would tell the listener, intentionality is the key here. This stuff looks random, but it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think that's what's so powerful about platforms like LinkedIn is that when you come from a place of intention and from a place of genuinely wanting to learn more about someone, to see how you can collaborate to help each other, nothing pisses me off more than hey, can I have 15 minutes to pick your brain? There's no intentionality behind that. You need to, again, lead with value, show that, I like what you have to say. I think I have something powerful to say. Maybe there's an opportunity for us to collaborate, work together, right? That's how you create. I'm a firm believer in which you can create your own positive chaos, right? Mm-hmm. And you need to be able to do that by reaching out and connecting with people. And LinkedIn is just an amazing, amazing platform for those who lead with intention.
So what do you actually recommend as a practical method instead of can I pick your brain, or it used to be because that is one of my I made a blog post about that recently because it's one of my least favorite phrases in the world. I'd like my brain unpicked. Thank you very much. But also, it used to be like, hey, can I take you out for coffee? Can I take you out for coffee and pick your brain? I used to think to myself, man, I can afford my own coffee. Like you're asking for something worth way more than a cup of coffee. You're asking for an hour of my time. I got to drive there and drive back. And if you actually think I'm someone, if you think I have so much value that you're going out of your way to ask for my time, my time is worth more than a cup of coffee. So give me something as a reason to say yes. Now, I've said yes to get a cup of coffee, and I've said yes to pick your brain, but never when it was phrased like that. So what would you recommend to somebody as a way to reach out?
Well, to me, one of the things that at least the strategies that I use is when I'm on LinkedIn and like you're trying to engage with new content and find what's out there. When I find people who I feel are genuine and are authentic and are worth my time for reaching out to connect, I think it's important that your viewers understand that they should be valuing their own time as well. And then when you do reach out, you mentioned it earlier there, Brian. Send a positive message. Give someone a compliment. I love when people pump up my ego. Someone says, "Hey, saw your video. It's fantastic." Frick, I'll give you 50 minutes of my time just because you said you like my content. It does go a long way. Again, don't be fake about it. If you don't like it, don't reach out. But if you're coming again from a place of authenticity and genuinely wanting to learn more, I love it when people just ask open-ended questions saying, "Hey, I love the recent video that you just did on X. We're working on something similar, or I'd love to learn more about X. Want to get your thoughts on that. Maybe there's areas where we can collaborate and work together." To me, using the word collaborate is music to my ears. I am someone who loves collaborating with people, especially people who have nothing to do with cybersecurity, because then that's to me is how you can make some magic happen.
Yeah, no, it's so true, and I'm just thinking too about how easy it is to get a little gun shy because you get them all day. I'm sure I get them all day on LinkedIn, which is these obvious copy and paste sales pitches. And they used to be really easy to tell. They're getting a little bit more clever now, right? And so sometimes what they've realized is by saying, "Hey, I'm really digging your work. Let's connect." And what
Too generic.
it's too generic, right? And if the only or even they've gotten, sometimes they get a little bit more clever, because this is when, what I mean by this is a person who is only they want you to hit the connect button because the next thing that's coming is like a 3-paragraph copy paste pitch about their service. And so I'm not talking about a person who's genuinely trying to make a connection or is actually looking for help, or even is looking for potentially a relationship that could lead to a sale, but the people who are just going to give you the cold pitch. And sometimes the red flag lately is their comment is just uses the title of the most recent thing I posted, right? Loved your video on, and it's like all in capitals, as if they just copy pasted the actual title of the blog post that I just. Like, if you're gonna reach out cold genuinely and compliment someone, at least go back a couple of things so that they have an idea that you've actually seen their work.
And one of the things too, of which I would suggest as well, is even before reaching out, take the time to comment on people's videos or content. Show a level of engagement first, and then if I see people who are continually engaging and then reach out. Again, I'm more likely to respond because they've taken the time to engage with my content, leave a meaningful comment. I'll reply to their comment. So even for people who just want to reach out to someone, start off by engaging with the content, then reach out.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like at this point I can tell that is essentially how I landed one of my biggest guests, which is Shama Hyder, who is like a legend in digital marketing. I mean, she basically invented social media marketing, and she's a proper thought leader, a proper A-list in this world. And I had been following her on LinkedIn for ages and never commented. And at one point I realized I'd love to have her on my podcast someday. And then I was about to reach out to her, and I'm like, oh, she doesn't know me from anyone. I'd have to open the email by name dropping a bunch of other people, and so I thought, all right, this was back in my first season. So I thought, I want to try to get her on season 2. So I'm looking 6 months down the road now, 8 months down the road. Yeah. So even though I'd been follower for a while, like I said, I just passively never commented. So I started intentionally making sure that every time I did consumer content that I did enjoy, not doing it fake, but when I enjoyed something that came through my feed, little comment, hit a like button, whatever. And I found that over a few months, she had started to realize who I was because she had responded, because she's really good about that, right? Yep. So she'll respond and say, oh, thanks so much for this, and oh, Brian, great to see you again, appreciate that comment, or blah, blah, blah. So after 3 or 4 months, when I did reach out to her via email, I was able to say, hey, Shama, we've had some really great exchanges on your LinkedIn posts recently. Yes. I've got a podcast about X, Y, and Z, and I think you'd be a great fit for my audience. Would you be interested, in talking about that more? And she just said yes instantly. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And that is the way I feel like people get, when you tell people about quote methods like that, they feel like it's like some scam. It's like, no, it's just taking things that you do genuinely and being intentional about it.
Absolutely. There's no formula to it, and I think that, the key theme as well is you have to be consistent. Provide that consistency, consistently do that over a span of weeks and months. I can't tell you how many times I've had someone comment on a post of mine, then send me a message saying, hey, I recently commented on your post. Do you think you can help me find a job? This isn't tick for tack kind of thing. It doesn't mean I reciprocate just because you left one comment, and the thing is that there's still so many people who subscribe to that short-term instant gratification mindset rather than the invest in a relationship. Again, in this digital age, in this virtual age, one of the ways that you can start a relationship is by engaging with content, engaging with the people on platforms like LinkedIn, and doing so consistently. Like consistently over weeks and months, not just doing it once and expecting to be paid handsomely in return.
So we got a story from you already, kind of a mini story about how you got your first job, and a guy, this manager took a risk on you. The whole core theme of this show has always been, from the very beginning, chance encounters, lasting impact. The fact that the seemingly insignificant interactions that we have on a day-to-day basis can actually be incredibly meaningful and incredibly beneficial. And even the tagline of the show is, every interaction is meaningful, every person you meet is important. So do you have a story that comes to mind, either personally or professionally, of like a chance encounter that really had an impact on your life in a way that even may not be obvious from the outside, or it may be? Some people come on and they say, bumped into the hiring manager at the company of my dreams while waiting in line for coffee. And that's the Hollywood version of that story. And some people have that. And some people have that happen. But a lot more often I find it was a random conversation in the world of someone that they probably never saw again or really didn't end up following up with, but it stuck with them for some reason, or anywhere in between. Do you have something for us?
Yeah, absolutely, I do. And I would say it very much blended my personal and professional. So when I started working, I always thought I was someone who was going to just work up the corporate ladder, going to be a corporate person through and through. And for 10 years of my career, I built up my career, and being to a spot where I was in charge of a cybersecurity team, and I was really miserable. I absolutely hated it. I was just cynical. I was jaded. I was not a happy person, and my brother had been in my ear for years, saying, you should be an entrepreneur, you should go out on your own. And I viewed that as being just too risky. I didn't want to do that. And one day when I was at a coffee shop waiting in line, and I was just scrolling through my messages from work, and I just dropped an F-bomb just waiting in line. And, I was just so pissed off about an email that I saw, and the gentleman in front of me looked back at me, and he said, "Tough day at the office?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, I just, some days I can't imagine my boss getting any stupider, and but somehow he proves me wrong. And the guy looked at me. He said, "You know what? It's okay to work for idiots, but only if you're that idiot." And the guy smiled and got his coffee and went on. And I couldn't stop thinking about that, what he said. And then a few more weeks went on, and then I realized, I thought to myself, oh, if that guy was saying, if there's any idiot who should tell me what to do, it should be this idiot. and so I had that moment of epiphany, and it was from sort of that led to, I would say, my final days in the corporate, when I then started to listen actually to my brother. I started listening to my friend who was a recruiter saying that I was getting screwed over in corporate, that I could have been paid more as an independent contractor and being more of an entrepreneur. I had shunned those conversations. I didn't listen to them. So that chance encounter really opened my eyes to listening to the people who had been really, looking out for me from day one. And that's allowed me to have this incredible entrepreneurial journey 5 years later.
That is exactly the kind of, those are exactly the kind of stories that this podcast was originally about when I first launched it, that I worry that I've gotten away from a little bit. I'm so glad you told me that. It's so easy to fall into just, the origin story conversations and the hiring manager stories and stuff like that. But man, that is so good. I wonder about that, if you had not already had that bug in your ear from, you said your brother, right? Or from some other folks, would you have noticed that comment, or would it have just floated on by? Like, I think about that stuff all the time.
That's a really, really good question, Brian. And I went years without thinking twice about that. It was actually only since COVID hit that I rethought about that conversation. And like I said, honestly, I hadn't thought about it in years, so it's fairly good timing. Otherwise, I would have forgotten about it. But you know what? I don't think if he had said that, I don't think it would have had the same impact, because the only life I thought I knew was being in corporate. To be that type of person, I never fully realized that. And at the time, I was a very me-centric person. All I was focused on was my career and getting to the next level. On so many levels, I'll never have the chance to thank that gentleman, because that journey I went on not just grew me professionally, but personally as well. The self-discovery I've gone on over the past 5 years of being someone who I thought I was introverted and just doing all things cybersecurity, just from my nose to the grindstone, to finding out that I'm someone who's very extroverted. I love relationships. I love meeting new people. I love talking. It's when I tell my kids about who I was before, they don't believe me, because all they do is see me on the phone all day talking. That's what they think their dad does for a living. And like I said, all this stuff in terms of who I was and how I flipped that me to a we has been truly remarkable. And the person who I thought I was, that wasn't me. That person kickstarted me onto the journey in terms of who I was meant to become.
That is such a good lesson too, because that underscores a really recurring theme on this show and in my work over the last few years, which is because my background's in philosophy of language, and so I think about language a lot in terms of how our language actually impacts the world, and language and the terms we use and the titles that we use to describe others, but more importantly to describe ourselves, really matter. Like they change the decisions that we make, because when you call yourself an employee versus when you call yourself an entrepreneur or an owner, you make different decisions. You see yourself differently. You carry yourself differently. You have to, right? When you introduced yourself back when you were in corporate America, and someone would say, "What do you do?" You'd have to say, "Well, I work at. I'm an employee of." Right? But now you get to say, "I own," or "I'm an entrepreneur." And there's a different weight that comes with that.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the connotation and power behind words, and they really do have an impact on our lives, and even having left corporate, what I've seen as well is the ability to be able to speak more freely. A lot of people talk about their corporate selves. Especially in my final days there, I really realized that I was living two lives. There was corporate me, and then there was real me. And I hated corporate me. I'm proud to say that corporate me is buried in the backyard. You'll never see the light of day again. But again, back to the power of words, in which the words I had to use at work, I couldn't speak almost, freely, to the point of being authentic to myself, and using words that weren't meaningful to me, but words that I had to say to be able to, be accepted in a corporate atmosphere.
That makes me that just brought up a maybe a totally random question, but I think it's really related to no, I think it's really related to this, because so first, do you have employees?
No, there's myself, my business partner, and then we have freelancers.
So I find this, when I talk to entrepreneurs, they always talk about how they hated themselves in corporate, and then they got out and now they're entrepreneurs. And a lot of times they have now employees. And I always think, they're always touting this message of you should go out for yourself, you should be an entrepreneur. And I always think, yeah, but you can't mean that for your own employees. Otherwise you'd have no one working for you, right? Yep. So I worry sometimes that we, I'm self-employed, we get a little too happy about the idea of working for yourself. Not everybody is made for, and not everybody should be working for themselves. And there is a way to work for someone else and still be your true self, right? Be your authentic self and be valued and be meaning. Do you have any thoughts on, maybe the question is, what could your organization or your company culture or your management done to keep you there, to keep someone as talented and as smart as you in the company instead of heading out to do your own thing?
For me, really, it's the fact that so many organizations, they talk about values. You'll walk into organizations where they have all these amazing values. Here's our mission statement, all the amazing things that we do, our culture, and it's printed up on the walls, and everything looks really nice and fancy. But then when you watch the leaders in action there, they do the complete opposite. I worked for someone who called himself a servant leader, but he was a micromanaging, I'm trying to think what word to use, but insert swear word. He wasn't a servant leader, and again, that it rang hollow. It was not an authentic place to work. So again, that's not to say that's true of all of corporate America. There are great, large organizations that not just say what they do in terms of a culture and values, but they actually live by that, because they have leaders, not just micromanagers. They have leaders who live by that and embody that every single day. And when you have empathetic leaders, then, I know, honestly, I likely would have stayed. I love the organization. I hated the people I work for. And that's the old adage, you don't leave companies, you leave the people you work for.
Absolutely. And on that note, I got to say, what's so funny about that is from my previous career in being a magician, a full-time magician for 10 years. I mean, I did that full time. And a lot of my work was for corporate, and a lot of that, especially in December and January, were holiday parties. And now I always tell people, if you want to know how the culture is at any company, large or small, all you got to do is spend 10 minutes in the cocktail hour of the company holiday party and just listen to the conversations, because you'd be able to tell instantly, because so often I would be there setting up for my show, for the after dinner show, and I would just be overhearing. And I was in kind of streets while I was setting up. People didn't even realize I was the magician, right? So they were just talking. Or even if they did know it was me, they figured, it's just the magician. I can tell him anything, right? You'd hear people talking. And it was amazing how sometimes these organizations had spent a fortune on these parties, but all anybody was doing was complaining.
Yeah.
And to me, that says that this party was being seen as a way to make up for a crappy culture.
Exactly.
Right? To not to apologize, but to say, but look what we do for you.
Yeah.
Whereas sometimes
open bar.
Yeah, exactly. You know what? And then there were other times when an organization that clearly was barely making ends meet would throw this wonderful private dinner in the back of the best restaurant they could afford, and the gratitude in that room and it was just amazing.
Yeah.
So
that's so true, Brian. And again, to me, people say this all the time. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Culture is the foundational underpinning of any successful company.
So let's pull this in here. I want to ask you one really, I think, practical question that'll be really useful, because I get sucked in, just like you do, I think, to mindset stuff. And every so often people are like, just tell me what to do. And they just want something practical. So you're talking to someone like me, maybe a sole proprietor, small business entrepreneur. What am I doing wrong with cybersecurity that I don't even realize?
To me, there's two things I always tell people to do. Sole proprietor, even small businesses, use a password manager. So something like LastPass, freely downloadable, allows you to just have a bunch of different secure passwords, which you don't have to remember. Just have to remember one, and then that auto populates into all your websites and whatever services you use, and can be done securely. The second one is to leverage what's referred to as multi-factor authentication. So if you're using like G Suite or Office 365, that's your username, password, and then you'll get a one-time code sent to your phone. You enter that code, then that adds extra layers of security around your password. The reason why that's important is that passwords are the most commonly breached data item today. And most people will reuse their passwords on multiple different sites for personal and for business. So to really combat one of the most prevalent threats right now, which is basically attackers taking passwords and using those all over the place, password manager, multi-factor authentication, that takes your risk reduction, or reduces your cyber risk from here down to here.
You heard it here. That was Dominic's keynote. That was
a TED Talk.
In 30 seconds. That was a TED Talk. That was it. The rest is cute pictures of cats playing with yarn. So that I'm so I got to tell you, I asked that question immediately regretting it, because I was like, he's gonna give me a whole bunch of stuff to do that I don't already do. I do both of those things. Cha-ching.
Perfect, Brian. So keep it simple.
I use 1Password. I have no affiliation with them. I know LastPass does great. Any of them, basically, they're really easy, and it's amazing because every time that you have to create, because we each have 400 passwords now. Every time, instead of using the same one on everything like we used to, I go and it just says generate, and I get to choose how many characters and I'll go 24 characters usually, which is insanity, right? I mean, you'd have to be working parallel supercomputers to be cracking these things.
That's exactly right.
So, and maybe they are, but if at that point they earned it, you know what I mean? Like there's only so much you can do.
The thing I always tell people, again, both personally and from even, like I said, small business perspective, don't be low hanging fruit. There's so many people out there, so many organizations that don't even do the basics. If you do the basics, do them well, you make it that much harder. And bad, criminals at the end of the day, they take an economic approach. If there's all sorts of low hanging fruit, they'll take the least path of resistance.
Dominic, where should people find you if there's folks who are interested in working with you or picking your brain over a cup of coffee? Where should they find you?
So please best way to find me is just on LinkedIn. Dominic Vogel. I'm the only one out there. Please feel free to reach out, connect. I'm always happy to chat. I love it when people reach out.
I'm so jealous of the fact that you got to say I'm the only one out there, Dominic Vogel, because I have one of the most common names in America, Brian Miller. There's 5,000 of us in America alone. There were 3 of me in my high school while I was in high school. Yeah, I can never get my name as anything. I always have to make stuff up. So anyway, I'll make sure that your LinkedIn is in the show notes, link to that, and also a link to your website.
Yeah, we'll have the company website, CyberSC. You can even reach out to me through there as well. But like I said, everyone's always welcome. And I'm very appreciative of you having me on the show, Brian. I had an absolute blast.
Wow, what a guy. Before you sign up for a password manager and check your multi-factor authentication settings, here are a few takeaways from this episode. First, small businesses have the most to lose when it comes to cybersecurity. As small businesses, we thrive and survive on the trust of our clients and customers. When that trust is broken, it's nearly impossible to repair without the war chest, as Dominic calls it, which is available to large corporations, but not to us. Second, Dominic only got to where he is today because, in his words, someone took a chance on him. 3 seasons of this podcast have taught me that this is the case for every single success story. Whether you've been lucky enough to have someone take a chance on you, you can always take a chance on someone else. It's always good practice to give as much or more than you get. And finally, it's perfectly possible to make new and meaningful connections in the virtual world. Professionally, LinkedIn is your best bet. Just be sure to offer value consistently before you ask for anything in return. Connect with Dominic on LinkedIn by searching Dominic Vogel or heading to the show notes where you'll also find his website where you can reach out for help on cybersecurity for your organization. If you found value in this or any episode of the podcast, send it to a friend or colleague or share it on LinkedIn and use the hashtag #BeyondNetworking so I can find you and thank you. And shout out to the folks who recently left a review on Apple Podcasts. Seriously, it means the world. I really appreciate it. That said, my name is Brian Miller. This is Beyond Networking, and we'll see you next time for the Season 3 finale with one of my dream guests.